I got my computer for work today for my new job. It was like updating all day. It was very exciting. It's my only non-pandemic related small talk, so I'm out of conversation topics now.
Hey, what's your new job?
Oh God. I'm going to be a channel account manager at PAX 8. So we sell software tools to managed service providers, which operate as outsourced IT firms for other companies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not convoluted.
I didn't really understand any of that other than sales and software.
Yeah.
But congrats on the new gig, man. I hope you're pumped about it.
Yeah, it should be pretty fun. It's like a good Colorado company. They have a seemingly a good culture. They're not going to make me go into the office maskless every day. So that's like pretty cool.
That's great.
Yeah, baby steps. But it's a little weird. It's going to be my first time working remotely during the pandemic because my last job made me come in every day.
Oh my God. I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I was an essential worker because I was doing cold calls.
Wow. Wow. I've forgotten what it's like to work in person.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting process because I've never like met any of these people. But it is 6:35, so we'll get started with our legislative update. Thanks, folks who've been able to come and join us. These updates are really important. We'll probably be doing one around monthly. The Colorado State Legislative Session only goes for a few months. Generally, it's January to May, but I know the schedule is a little different this year because of COVID. But there's a lot of urgency to do the work that we need to do. There's going to be a lot of calls to action as bills move through from committee to the floor through the various chambers. If you have any questions about any of this, you can email yimbdenver@gmail.com, and we'd be happy to talk with you about the state legislative process. Today, we are going to be talking about two things that are going on at the Capitol. The first, we have Javier Mabry from the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project, and he's going to talk about some efforts to reform Colorado's eviction court law. And then we're going to move into a conversation around HB 21-1117 with Representatives Lontine and Gonzales-Gutierrez, and that's the bill that will do Telluride repeal. For those of you who are in with the housing lingo. For those of you who are just showing up tonight, there is a court decision that really limits the ability of cities to require affordable housing and projects. It goes way past prohibiting rent control. It even stopped the mayor from giving some payments to businesses during the pandemic. So those are the two things we're going to be talking about. But I'll just kick it over to Javier and we can dive in.
All right, thanks, Adam. And thank all of you for coming today. Housing is a major issue in Colorado, as all of you know. All of us deal with housing affordability issues, and excited to talk about some legislation aimed at improving the rights of renters in Colorado. So a little bit about me. I am a staff attorney and the political director at the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project. I spend about half my time in court defending tenants in eviction cases. Our organization started out in April after my friend Zach Newman sent out a tweet and he said, "I'm a lawyer, and if you need help in an eviction case, please send me a DM." He got about 500 DMs the first night. And from there, he and I connected. We have a growing team of about 5 or 6 attorneys now. And since that time, we've represented about 1,200 clients in Colorado eviction courts. So we are partnering with the Colorado Center on Law and Policy, Enterprise Community Partners, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and 9 to 5 Colorado to bring a bill that is sponsored by Senator Julie Gonzales and Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez, and it is aimed at reforming Colorado's eviction process. So if you want to go to the next slide, Adam, that would be great. So the reason why we're doing this is because, housing is sort of a fundamental value, right? Like all Coloradans deserve a safe place to call home, especially during the pandemic. But Colorado is one of the worst states in the country for renters. We rank 41st. Texas and Oklahoma are actually more tenant friendly than Colorado. In Colorado, tenants lack fundamental due process rights, basic protections, and it's really difficult for eviction defense attorneys to stop evictions. I often feel like it's my job to convey bad news to my clients. I also want to flag that this is an issue that disproportionately impacts communities of color. Studies from across the country have shown that people of color, particularly Black and Latinx people, constitute 80% of those facing eviction. Black households are twice as likely than white households to be evicted. As we know, evictions can lead to lasting consequences in people's lives. So if you want to move to the next slide, Adam. Thank you. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of this bill, I just want to flag that our organization sits on the Renters Roundtable, and the Renters Roundtable is supporting a series of housing bills that will improve Colorado for renters and homeowners. We're trying to improve housing for working people, and the first is the eviction court reform bill, which I'll get into. There's also going to be legislation on late fees. Currently in Colorado, there's no limit on late fees, and renters can be evicted for late fees alone. So there's a serious need. And I know Rep. Lontine and Rep. Gonzales-Gutierrez are going to talk about the inclusionary zoning bill, which we're excited about and supportive of. And then I think there's also potentially going to be bills about collecting data on evictions. Any advocacy in support of all of these would be great. So, all right. So the first thing I want to flag is pretty obvious, but evictions lead to extreme suffering, right? Like people who are evicted have damaged credit scores, they have evictions on their record, and it leads to a cycle of homelessness because once you're evicted and that's on your record and on your credit, it is almost impossible for you to find stable housing. As a result, there are reduced health outcomes, disease, the distress of being evicted leads to mental health problems. And for children, and this one is actually personal to me and why I got in this work. I experienced eviction when I was in high school, and I actually dropped out of high school as a result. And that sort of experience is too common. When kids are evicted, they just fall too far behind in school. So this is like, everything's rooted in the home. It's health, it's education, it's our welfare, it's everything. So next slide, Adam, please. Okay, so at the outset, I said that Colorado is one of the worst states in the country for renters. We offer very little in the way of due process or substantive rights in court. It makes it very difficult, sometimes nearly impossible, for tenants to have positive outcomes in Colorado cases. And, in addition, there's not a lot of accountability on judges, even where the tenants do have substantive defenses, because there are bond requirements where tenants need to post bond to appeal and have their case heard by a judge further down the line that price tenants out of raising their legitimate defenses or any problems that there was with a particular judge. And I will say that judges, for the most part in Colorado, are pretty landlord friendly. So next slide. So to truly address the eviction crisis in Colorado, we need to change the law, right? So right now, hundreds of thousands of Coloradans face risk of eviction. We see this in the number of people who are applying for rent relief at the state level. where rent relief or the national eviction moratorium is not covering folks, there are common issues that we see that need to be addressed immediately so that we can prevent as many cases of homelessness as possible. And one thing that I'll flag here is, some of this might slow down the process of eviction by like a week, but none of it harms landlords who comply with the law. We're just trying to make it so that landlords, where they've violated the law, the tenant can bring up their concerns. So the first thing that we need to address is the cure period. This is the amount of time that you have to catch up on your rent before the eviction process starts and you're sort of disallowed by the courts for even paying your rent. Right now in Colorado, it's 10 days. That's too short for renters to come up with their back rent and avoid eviction. The rent relief timeline, it takes renters about 21 to 30 days on average to access rent relief. And that is a longer timeline than the cure period. So we got to make sure that tenants can access rent relief and stay in their homes. Another issue is that tenants have to post bond with courts to assert basic defenses. I'll get into this a little bit more, but basically this prices renters out of court and it prevents us from bringing what would otherwise be valid defenses in a state like Oklahoma or Texas or California. So we don't want renters to be priced out of court. Next we want to deal with predatory clauses in leases that punish renters well above and beyond the eviction process. And give landlords an incentive to evict when they might otherwise be willing to negotiate. We want to give renters a chance to request documents from their landlords in their cases. Right now, it's difficult to do that. And then finally, we want to hold landlords accountable where they break the law and illegally lock out their tenants without going through the court process. This looks like the landlord shows up, changes the lock, didn't give you any paperwork. This is particularly a problem in undocumented communities. So next slide. All right, so the first thing that our legislation does is it extends the cure period to give tenants more time to catch up and avoid the eviction. Basically what we're doing here is we're giving the tenant the entire eviction process to pay their rent and avoid the eviction. So up until the hearing, if the tenant comes up with their rent, the rent that they owe their landlord, then the eviction will be kicked out. So it does nothing to, this provision does nothing to slow down the current eviction process. It just uses the full timeline to give renters more of an opportunity to get rent relief and pay back their rent. Currently, from the time you're served a notice to the time there's a hearing, this is typically a period of about 22, 23 days. And so we're adding about 12 days where tenants have an opportunity to catch up on their back rents and avoid eviction. We feel like this is reasonable because these evictions are brought for non-payment of rent and the tenants are coming forward and saying, hey, I have my rent. Next slide. Okay, so the next one, this one is really important to me. I'm really passionate about it. Landlords, when you rent any property, I'm sure many, if not all of you are renters, your landlord has an obligation to provide a safe and habitable home to you. This means that it must have things like running water, functioning plumbing, a functioning heater, functioning appliances, and be free of pests, rodents, etc. Right now, if a landlord is violating this requirement and you have fallen behind in your rent, you cannot bring that up in your eviction case. So for example, we have a client whose apartment flooded. She was a single mom. It destroyed so much of her property, made the place almost completely unlivable. She then lost her job due to COVID, got evicted because she couldn't afford to pay her rent. And she calls us up and she says, hey, my apartment flooded, all this stuff happens. And looks like we went back a little bit. But anyway, she said, called us up, told us what happened. And we couldn't do anything for her about the flood or the violations in her eviction case because she could not afford the bond that Colorado courts require in order for you to bring up habitability defenses. So right now in Colorado, you have to post bond if you're going to bring up something having to do with the health and safety. This bond amount is often set in the hundreds and more often thousands of dollars. And if you're in a situation where you can't afford your rent, it just means it's impossible for you to defend yourself. So reform here gives our clients a leg to stand on. It gives renters and working people a leg to stand on where their landlords have violated their rights. And I'll just flag, there's no bond requirements in Kentucky, Oklahoma, South Carolina, North Carolina. This is reasonable reforms. Okay, and I'll start going a little bit quicker too. So the next thing is we want to get rid of predatory clauses in your lease. The main clause we're trying to get rid of is what's called a liquidated damage clause. Basically what this says is if you want to break your lease, you have to pay the landlord some excessive amount in damages. So, for example, you might have to move because you get a job in a new place, a relative gets sick, whatever. There are no limits on the clauses that landlords can put in leases punishing you for breaking your lease early. And we see liquidated damage clauses well into the thousands. I have a friend who had one for $6,000. These incentivize landlords to go through the eviction process so that they can get those damages. For low income clients, that added incentive for the landlord to see the eviction process through to the end is particularly damaging because there might be a situation where the landlord might be willing to negotiate on a reasonable move out and they don't. So we want to get rid of those clauses and also make sure that if there's anything regarding attorney's fees, that it goes both ways. Right now, there are clauses in leases that award attorney's fees only to the landlord, and we feel that that's not equitable. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next provision in this law has to do with landlords that act beyond the scope of the law and lock out their renters without going through the normal court process. Our legislation penalizes landlords who do this, and it also authorizes the Attorney General to go after landlords who violate the law in this way. The way we penalize the landlords is we allow tenants to sue for the greater amount of $5,000 or 3 times the rent. And like I said, this is particularly a problem in immigrant communities where landlords take advantage of the language barrier and the power imbalance. All right, next slide. So the next thing that we're trying to do is give tenants an opportunity to request documents in their eviction cases. Right now, that's really complicated. Our legislation creates a simple form that sort of streamlines the process. This will make it easier for renters to prepare for their eviction hearings and avoid eviction. And I'm trying to rush through to stick to the timeline, so we can go to the next slide too. No. Okay, so finally we're at additional protection. So some of these are really technical. They have to do with like deadlines on the day that the eviction is. We're also trying to give renters an extra week to prepare for their trial. But one I want to highlight here is the bottom one, eliminating the appeal bond. I alluded to this earlier, but this is particularly important because if you are facing an eviction and the judge rules against you, and you know the judge has done something improper, right now the judge who you are appealing against gets to set the bond, which is basically the price that you need to pay to hold him accountable in the higher court, in the him or her accountable in the higher court. I'm actually working on a case today. I stayed up all night writing a motion where it's really clear that my client is an active duty service member in the military. There are clear protections to stop evictions in these cases. The judge is ignoring those protections and moving forward anyways, and my client has to pay $11,000 if they want to appeal that. And so that needs to be gotten rid of. We need to make sure that tenants are able to bring up that the judge that they face didn't apply the law properly. There's no accountability with this appeal bond. So I'm going to drop, you can move to the next slide, Adam. I don't know if we have time for questions anymore. I think I went about 5 minutes over, but I will say.
No, we still have time for questions.
Okay, great. But I will say that these stakes are incredibly high, especially now housing is a fundamental problem here in Colorado, and we need to do something for renters. So if you want to help out, one thing that you can do is fill out this form that I just dropped into the chat. It'll automatically send a letter to your state rep or senator. I'm assuming that your state rep or senator supports this because our Denver reps and senators are great on housing. But outside of that, we need help organizing in other communities. We need people willing to testify, tweet, etc. And I will drop my email in the chat. And I'm also doing some community organizing on this. If you want to get involved, you can email me. Okay, and now I think we're moving on to questions.
Yeah, there's like a couple of questions in the chat. I'm seeing, Jonathan was asking, like, what was the original rationale behind even having like a bond requirement for the warrant of habitability?
Yeah, so the rationale behind having the bond requirement there is they want to, the argument is that landlords should be secured in case the tenant is trying to bring a frivolous claim, in which case, to the extent that this delays the proceedings, the court knows that the landlord will get money at the end either way. The problem with that is it completely prices out anybody who's low income, because even if you have money, you're not going to want to post it and gamble on a chance that you win when if you lose, you need to go find other housing anyways. And so the thought process is to secure the landlord, but the result is to price tenants out of court. And I will say, this doesn't really slow down the process all that much. It might add a week, and I am confident that these judges in Colorado will be very aggressive on tenants who are bringing these claims. And I don't imagine that Colorado courts will tolerate frivolous claims as it is. So.
And then Steve, I see your question about constitutionality in the chat. I was wondering if you wanted to just ask that. I'm not sure I'll get across exactly what you were asking.
Sure. So let me pull it up. Yeah, so in the state constitution, it has a section, it says verbatim, courts of justice shall be open to every person, and a speedy remedy afforded for every injury to person, property, or character, and right to justice shall be administered without sale, denial, or delay. I was just wondering, like, it probably came up in the past, like posting bond for appeals and the constitutionality of that with respect to this. I was just wondering what the rationale for that was.
Yeah, I honestly cannot provide a direct response to that other than to say, we have read that clause in the Constitution and considered bringing impact litigation cases to get Colorado courts to interpret the Constitution in a way that provides renters access to justice. I will say on the appeal side of this in particular, there was a case in the 80s where somebody tried to say that the appeal bond was unconstitutional, and the court ruled that it was fine. The logic behind it is similar to the bond requirement on the warranty of habitability. And I think it's rooted in Colorado's history as a deep, deep red state that favors property rights over almost anything. The law seems to be concerned with the speedy remedy for the landlord more than it does the equal access to justice for the tenant.
And that's all I saw in terms of questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions for Javier?
Yeah, so this is a bit, Jonathan here, I guess bit detailed, but I am wondering, the liquidated damages, is that equivalent to the common lease language that says, hey, you owe at least X months of future rent if you break a lease, or are these damages above and beyond that lease breaking fee?
That is an example of a liquidated damage clause. And I will say that those clauses, yes, they exist in other states, but in the vast majority of other states, those clauses are not allowed. And the way, sort of the first year of law school, you learn basic landlord tenant law. The way that this typically is dealt with is if you break your lease and move early, you're responsible for the amount of rent that would be owed while the landlord cannot find somebody to replace you. So the common law historically across this country says that the landlord has a duty to reasonably try to find somebody new. And if they can't, you owe them the rent for when they cannot find somebody. These lease clauses like the one you described try to circumvent that practice as it is supposed to be followed under the law. And so we're just trying to make it go back to how I described it. You'll be responsible if your landlord can't find somebody.
Thanks.
Cool. Any other questions?
I just had a quick one. This is Steve again. Do you have a name and number for this bill?
Not yet, but we think that it will be introduced next week, potentially the following. I'm not exactly sure on that, but we do have a one-pager and a fact sheet that we can send around, but it's pending a title and introduction. But I will make sure that Adam has our fact sheet to send around to everybody after this.
Cool. Sweet. Well, I guess, are you guys ready? I'm sure we're all excited to talk about HB 21-1117. We like the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project are part of the Renters Roundtable. That's kind of where a lot of the policy thoughts that we have coming are from. It's a really cool organization. Definitely if you have any questions about them, we'd be happy to answer that as well. You can reach out to me. But we've been supportive of Telluride repeal for the last couple of years. The bill has changed some, and basically we think that the Telluride court decision goes goes too far in the way it limits what communities can do. Additionally, because it's a court decision and not like a piece of legislation, its borders are nebulous and ever changing. And one of the reasons we think this repeal is so important is that we don't want to get 2.5 years into repealing single unit zoning and then not be able to do something and have people use this as an excuse to back out. So this is really a step to set the conditions for a successful removal of exclusionary zoning in our communities. But with that, I'd just like to say thanks to Javier and introduce Representative Lontine to just talk about the bill and kind of where we're at, how it's evolved, and what we can do to support it.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Happy to visit with y'all about the inclusionary zoning bill. I'm bringing forward with Representative Serena Gonzales-Gutierrez. The bill has been introduced, as mentioned. It's House Bill 1117. We don't have a date for a hearing yet, but we're thinking in about 2 weeks, we will have a hearing date. I'd like to just kind of take a step back and give a little bit of history. You've talked about it some with the Telluride decision, but I'm going to take an even further step back and talk about, how did Colorado end up with a statute that prohibits rent control? And it started with a case in Boulder in 1980. And the Boulder citizens filed an initiative to cap rent increases on existing housing stock. And so in response to that, the General Assembly adopted a statute forbidding any ordinance that would control residential rents. In the late 90s, the city of Telluride, in attempt to provide affordable housing for folks who worked in Telluride, required a developer to provide or put in a percentage of affordable housing units in a development they were going to do. And in response to that, the developer sued the city of Telluride. And the Supreme Court decision basically stated that requiring that developers to include affordable housing was a form of rent control. But that the legislature did have the ability to step in and make changes. So that's what we are doing. As to the genesis of our bill, it really began with an attempt to repeal rent control. But I got to tell you, that was a lift too high. And we just couldn't overcome the political will in the legislature to do that. And so we decided to look at a repeal of Telluride. It's been an interesting journey, but I learned an awful lot about zoning and how it affects what we build and where we build and how high we build. And so prior to this, in 2010, there was a bill passed that allowed that if there was a voluntary agreement between a city with zoning and a developer, that they could enter into an inclusionary housing agreement. And so that's kind of what we're operating on now. And as a result of that, we have cities across the state who have various programs. Some of them are really borderline, probably not legal, but they're able to do some backflips to make it work. Boulder has a program where they require 25% of new development have affordable housing in it. They do allow options for developers, and those options are things like either cash in lieu or donation of land in value equivalent to what that development would be worth. So, and then we have other places. I'm trying to find my list of other towns. Aspen has affordable housing credits. Vail has an inclusionary 10% with options. Eagle also 10% with options. You know, it's all over the map. Denver, they will kind of negotiate individually with different developers, as long as it's a negotiation. Now, if a developer doesn't need it, if they have a plot of land that doesn't need any reason for them to go back to city council and ask for any variance for a project, then they can build whatever they want without the city council being able to weigh in and have any requirement for inclusionary zoning. So that is why this is important, because we're missing out on opportunities to address increasing our stock in affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, this is not aimed at, you know, folks in the low income brackets or to address folks experiencing homelessness. This is really around folks who are in the 60%-ish AMI category, area median income. And so what we are giving our municipalities is the ability to require developers to, you know, have a percentage of their development include affordable housing. And we do not put a cap on it. We want to make it flexible, because we think that, you know, not every situation, you know, it's not a one size fits all situation. So we need to have flexibility in the program. And we are also offering other options like Boulder does, with either cash in lieu or a donation of land. And we are going through the land use statutes, not the rent control statutes, because we didn't believe, we didn't want them to be conflated. And this is, inclusionary zoning is about new development. It's not about capping rent in any way on existing rental units. So we could go on all night, I suppose, but I'm open to questions.
Yeah, and I'll just also add, we'll be doing a presentation on rent control, you know, and what that means and all of the different policies that are included kind of in that term over the next couple of weeks. So if you're curious about that, you know, that'll be a great opportunity to learn more as well. But yeah, does anybody have any questions for Representative Lontine?
Representative Lontine, this is Jonathan. I do have a couple of questions for you, but one thing that I wasn't sure I heard correctly, so I wanted to clarify for my own benefit and for the group. I think you've said this, but all this is doing is saying that cities and municipalities and counties will have the option of inclusionary zoning. It's not enforcing it anywhere. It's just opening the tool of the toolbox, right?
Yeah, it's a may, not a shall. So it's permissive. And if cities want to take advantage of it, they can. This is not a tool that's going to work in, you know, really rural towns where, you know, they don't have the pressures that, say, a Denver or a Boulder or even now Aurora, you know, is having. And also, you know, we're facing these issues. This has been a continuing problem in our resort communities. So we believe that they will be some of the towns that will take advantage of this.
Okay, and I think my other question about it was about the options provided. I wasn't sure if I read the bill text correctly, but it does sound like even with the new provision of what cities are allowed to do for newly constructed or redeveloped housing units, the regulation that the municipality puts together cannot only provide the option of inclusion housing, it must provide options to the developer. So like you said, the donated land or a linkage fee or something along those lines. Or would it be possible for a city to say, hey, there are no other options. It's just inclusionary zoning. You have to do it.
No, if if a municipality decides, or a county decides to take advantage of this, they have to offer this menu of options. So either they're building it on site, they're giving cash in lieu, or they're donating land. And all are acceptable under this.
Cool. And then we had a question from Katie Blakey. Is there a cap on, how much affordable housing a city council could require through this?
No, we did not want to put a cap in because we believe it needs to be flexible so that different municipalities can make it fit for what works for them. If we put a cap of, say, 15%, then we are basically outlawing what Boulder is already doing with their 25% cap. If we say 25%, then I think that scares the development community. And I think that, most municipalities will think that they have to aspire to that, but that may not be a good fit for them. So we don't want to, cause problems for existing programs that are kind of skirting some gray areas or doing, some kind of different gymnastics that they have to do to make their programs work. But we just don't believe it's a good thing to do one size fits all. And we would really not prefer not to have a cap on it. Of course, I don't know how aware you are all of the legislative process, but we call it making the sausage. So, anything could happen. And we are just at the first step of getting it into a committee hearing.
Awesome. Well, I see Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez has joined us. I'm not, Representative Lontine introduced the bill and we've done a couple questions, but I'm not sure if you want to add anything, like particularly what's brought you to the housing fight or to this legislation.
Yeah, so it's funny. I literally have been talking about housing all evening. I have been on like 3 other calls. I'm not even kidding. That's where I just came from, was another call talking about housing and the importance of this. And so I must have been like the housing night that everybody decided to have their Zoom calls on the same night. So thanks, Susan, for going through the bill and everything. And I'm excited to join this effort with Susan again. And we're really hopeful that things are going to go well for us this year. When it comes to housing in general, for me, my background's in social work. And so I was a caseworker for some time. I still work in the human services field, even as my other job, since we're paid part-time in the legislature. And, some of the things that I hear a lot of times is the lack of affordability for families, and especially the families that I work with that are already facing a lot of barriers, are system involved, like human services involved, or juvenile justice involved, or their kids have truancy cases, things like that, that housing is yet another one of those barriers for these families. And it's really interesting to hear folks say, like, why can't you just get your kids to school? And, a lot, and that is mostly for the reason that people are, they're thinking about, where are we going to put our head at night? We need a roof over our heads. And so school becomes like less of a priority because our basic needs aren't being met. As it relates to specifically like with the inclusionary zoning bill, I grew up in North Denver, and, people do call it the Highlands. I call it the North Side because I actually grew up here, and my mother grew up here, and so did my grandmother. So we're all North High Vikings, and like we all went to North High School. And so I have actually witnessed the changes that have happened in the neighborhood, and has priced a lot of people out that have been here for generations, like myself. When my husband and I, after we graduated from college in 2003, we were up in Fort Collins. We both wanted to move back to our neighborhood in Denver. At that time, we were able to rent a house, I kid you not, in North Denver on 39th and Lowell for $800 a month. I think that's pretty much unheard of right now. And then we were, we got engaged and we're like, okay, let's buy a house. And so we started looking for houses. We were just both recently graduated from college, and I made like $24,000 a year working in a DYS facility, Division of Youth Services facility. So I wasn't making really a lot of money, and neither was my husband. And so we didn't qualify for a huge loan or anything. And so we're looking for a place in North Denver we could not afford in 2008. At that time, I think the average cost was like $500,000 for a home. So we ended up going to Wheat Ridge, and we lived in Wheat Ridge for 10 years until we were able to like go far enough in our careers to make enough money to move back to our old neighborhood, which was very expensive to be able to move back to our old neighborhood. And we're still making it work, and I'm glad to be here. But I just wanted to share, some of that, I guess, personal story, and with, the crisis of housing that we're seeing in Denver, and it does hit close to home,
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And Greg, I saw you have a question about the bill.
So I wanted to raise an issue, but first of all, I want to say, go North Side. I grew up in Denver too, and it was always the North Side. But anyway, so I have a friend who works for a large apartment developer, and he and I were, and he's a very liberal guy, and he and I were talking about this issue of affordable housing, and also, including a certain amount of units as affordable units. And one of the things he brought up, which I thought was a very good point, is that, one of the things that drives the cost of housing is the cost of land. And so, but they, as apartment developers, they have to compete for land with office developers, retail developers. Those are the other primary users, but only residential developers have to bear any of the cost of providing affordable housing. And I don't know, it's a complex issue in how you spread it around, but if you're an office developer, it's not your problem, right? You can just buy the land, build whatever you want. You don't have to make any contribution to creating affordable housing in the city. Same for if you're developing a shopping center. But if you're a residential developer, then you're expected to contribute. And so I just wanted to throw that out there as something that for people to think about, because that seemed to me to have some real merit in that, why is one particular class of developer saddled with the entire burden of providing affordable housing? So.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Greg. And, there's actually a project in Denver right now where they're doing like another big rezoning at the Denargo market area. And there's the potential that a lot of that could be office. So what Host did is they made them basically agree to, even if it's office, like set aside a certain amount of land for affordable housing. So, I think that there's ways to, when you're dealing with these large scale rezonings, and this is why I like how kind of wide open the Telluride repeal is, there's ways for us to incorporate, some of that kind of stuff, where if we're going to do big rezonings that could potentially become office parks, we can incorporate, that in there as well.
It's a little simpler in that situation because it's one project that has it's a multi-use project. Mm-hmm. The bigger thing is that if you're a guy who's just building an office building and you have no residential in it, you're home free. You don't have to worry about it. So anyway, not going to solve that today, but I thought it was an important point to bring up.
Well, I appreciate that. I will say we are seeing projects where there's a requirement for retail or some other ground floor businesses and housing apartments on the upper levels. I'm also think that one of the things that we're going to see as an effect of COVID is that I don't know that a lot of folks are actually going to be going back to an office. I think we're going to see a glut of office space in our cities as a result of this. So I think we're going to find ourselves in some new territory, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all balances out. And I don't know the answer to that question, but just some thoughts I'd like to throw in.
Yeah, if I could just say a little bit on that, that's what I do for a living. I'm an office broker in downtown Denver for CBRE, and we talk a lot about this, obviously. And I think just from what we're seeing with our clients is that they are going to go back to the office, but most of their people are going to come in 2 or 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week. And it means that, sort of the dedicated workstation or the dedicated office is probably, it's going to be a lot less common if it doesn't go away completely. And so people will share space because they're not coming in all the time. That points to probably a 25 to 30% less space that the company will need for the same number of employees because they're going to be sharing. So that goes to exactly what you were saying, Susan, is that could create a glut. The flip side of that, though, is we were having a ton of growth from tech companies and other people coming, particularly into downtown, that may offset that to some degree. So it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen, but we'll see.
And then I saw a question from Steve in the chat that I think is pretty important. I'm sure you guys are getting this a lot, but there's obviously this would be an additional cost on development. Is there a concern that this would dampen the amount of like residential units and project starts that would go under process, if cities adopted these policies?
I mean, I think that's one of the, arguments that are being made. That's not, I don't know that, I think it depends on what is the type of contract that those developers are making with the city and whatever the local municipalities are deciding and what they're, as far as like their percentage that they will be requiring. I think the local municipalities have the ability to like negotiate other ways that would help developers perhaps in developing on the land. And so I think that's what we're hearing, at least from our local partners, is that, they can more or less, sweeten the deal by, looking at different fees and things like that in order to make sure that they do have the units that are being required by whatever local municipality. And in the bill, we do have not only its units, but you can do cash in lieu. So there are those options as well. And so I think that's really the goal, is to give that flexibility to the local communities so that they can do what they think is going to be best fit for their community.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions? Awesome. Well, I know that this is kind of preaching to the choir a little bit regarding this inclusionary housing proposal. But I just, really want to stress how important this is as we're going into the residential infill project in Denver, and then, these steps all around the country. There was a great article posted in the YIMBY Denver group about Boston and all of the different equity policies they're undertaking in their city. Most of those are illegal in Denver because of Telluride. So that's like a huge problem. And again, additionally, it's, we've heard some of our city councilors use it as a crutch, saying, oh, well, we can't require affordable housing, so we can't undertake these, bigger reforms. So we know that's important as well. And then I would even argue that, this is a developer-friendly bill. The reality that we see here in Denver today is that, every single rezoning is this like one-off fight over how many units you're going to include. It's chaotic, it's unpredictable until the end of the process. This lets us set out rules and clear expectations from the very beginning, which is really, really, definitely helpful as well. So I did get another question. So, we've talked a lot about the content of the bill. I know you guys have some new supporters in the Colorado Municipal League and some other folks this year, but would you guys be able to speak to the kind of politics and what's come up in the past and, where you see kind of roadblocks to passage?
Well, surprisingly enough, our biggest opponents are mostly developers, but I would say that they're not monolithic in this. Some of them are very opposed. Some of them are a little bit grumpy about it, but they're okay. Some of them, they're like, okay, whatever. And then some of them are supportive. So there's a diverse opinion amongst developers, even here in Denver. But I would say that the developer community is probably our biggest opponent. And then the next would be the Colorado Realtors, but also because they are also closely tied to the Apartment Association. So, and then, this is a policy that Governor Polis is not fond of either. And so, I think our biggest hurdle will be getting the governor to sign it. So if you guys have any pull with the governor.
I mean, I do have to stress, I think that's why our group is really important and why we're going to be pushing on this is you guys all know, we're, I guess I would say closer to the developers than many other housing advocacy groups. We actually have the ability to move these people and help them see how this policy is going to be beneficial to them and our communities. And as well, I know we all have friends outside of Denver. The Denver delegation is going to be pretty supportive of this, but I was messaging all my friends in Durango. Everywhere your friends are, get them the link to send in a letter. Their legislators need to hear about this. They need to think that that housing and this bill is the most important thing that everybody's talking about. That's the way that this is going to get passed. So I really do think, your letters are really going to matter on this because, even though Representative Lontine and Senator Gonzales and, Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez have been working for years on these housing issues, it's just it's still so new for a lot of the people in the legislature. I texted my friends in Boulder too, but, definitely make sure to get all of your friends supporting this. And this is why we wanted to do it early, even before this first hearing is, we want to get these letters into the legislators now, not when this has already kind of gotten into the process and lobbyists are haggling about it. And, so that's kind of my thoughts. I'll also take questions if anybody has any questions for me about the what I think the politics are as we move through kind of Denver's residential infill process. But yeah, I mean, I guess we've got some extra time. So, anybody has anything else they want to add? I saw Leslie ask that if we can find out which developers are opposed.
Well, there's a variety of them. I know Andrew Feynman's been opposed to it from the beginning. He's the owner of Exto. So he's one of them.
Yeah, I will say that, with some of
Feinstein,
these folks,
yes, you're right.
I talked with them last year and, a lot of them have expressed concerns. Sorry, I'm ranting so much about this. I think this bill's really important. But, they had been expressing concerns that municipalities would pass really aggressive anti-development rules. But frankly, those communities are passing that kind of stuff without this bill passing. They don't need to be allowed to do inclusionary zoning to do the Lakewood growth cap. So I think that that's a bit of not really a real concern because, those communities will end up being punished for using this irresponsibly anyways. So I think, we really do have some space to talk to folks in the community and, really bring people around on this because I understand, and this is why we're going to do this rent control presentation over the next couple of weeks. I understand the prejudices people can bring to this kind of conversation, but this is just a critical way we can make land use really, heal some of the wounds of the past. Yeah.
Can I just add something to that when you mentioned rent control? You know, we did try to pass a bill in 2019 on rent stabilization, which essentially is rent control. And it really didn't go anywhere. And Susan, I think you were on that bill too.
Yeah,
You and
yeah.
I.
It tanked. We didn't even get to it. It died in the Senate.
Right in the Senate. So same team here. But I guess what I want to say is that that's one of the messages that is out there, is that this is rent control. And I think people that are like truly in the know that it is not. And so we want to dispel that rumor. And so as you're talking to folks and, you know, doing the good work of reaching out to your legislators, which I think is awesome. If you have the span of, you know, reaching out to legislators across the state, we know that like both, of course, Front Reach, urban, and then also a lot of our mountain ski towns could really benefit from this legislation. And so, you know, if you're doing that reach out, to also dispel any rumor that this is rent control would really help us a lot, because some of our opponents are trying to use that as a point of opposition and trying to get people scared of this bill by saying that this is rent control. So, because I know you all know that it is not, I'm sure you all can provide that information to folks as well.
Excellent. Did everybody send in a letter from the link I posted earlier? I'll post it again just so you guys can get our Action Network link for this one. And then I'll also post the COVID-19, the eviction one as well.
Thanks, Adam. Send letters on eviction court reform too, y'all.
Yes.
Great bills. Vote yes.
Yeah, for sure. But I guess we can give everybody some of their time back. I'm down to stay on and socialize a bit if people just kind of want to talk about anything else a little bit more. I know we all don't spend enough time on Zoom. Just like a couple closing announcements. You know, our next event is going to be our next currently scheduled event is on March 10th. We're going to have Sonia Traus come and do a discussion with us about the history of the YIMBY movement and her work in California to hold cities accountable who are violating, you know, affordable housing laws. For those of you who don't know who Sonia is, she's kind of like the founder of the YIMBY movement, and she's kind of a character. So it should be a pretty good conversation. So that'll be March 10th, 2 weeks at the same time slot. And then we'll also, as I mentioned, Jonathan's going to be putting on this rent control presentation. We'll be posting some videos of that and maybe doing some live as well. And then, of course, last but not least, you know, we are a all volunteer organization currently, and we're working on building our membership to hire an organizer so we can fight for affordable and abundant housing all over Denver and the metro area. I just posted our membership link. If you guys can make a contribution, that would be very much appreciated so we can continue this work. But that's pretty much all I got. You know, thank you, Representative Lontine and Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez. And I'm down to hang out if anybody wants to talk more, but you know, thanks so much for coming.
I haven't had dinner yet, so I'm going to say bye.
Yes. Thank you. Good night.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, good night.
Thanks, guys. Hey, let me know if you want to. I'm happy to talk about rent control and specifically my experience. I think you and I have talked about this a